test. Good morning and welcome to the worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Hobart. My name is Barb Langle and I participate in the life of the church by serving on the board of directors, among other things. We are a religious community of people with diverse beliefs and shared values. Our diverse beliefs are expressed in our 6 sources, and our shared values are expressed in our 7 principles, both of which can be found online at the uua.org. Together, we strive to grow spiritually, build community, and live the values in the world. Until Pastor Tom joins us in August, we are inviting members or guests to share a special message with us. This morning, you will be hearing in the pulpit Sandi Waters. This service will be recorded and will be available for future viewing on Facebook, YouTube, and the church website. I have a few announcements. Michelle, did you have something first?
Yeah, I just wanted to invite everyone. Faith in Action would just like to invite everyone, if they're interested, to the Lake County Council meeting on July 12th. There are a couple of council members who are interested in looking at ways that they could help with, we have the gun show at the Lake County Fairgrounds every couple months, so they're looking at ways that they could keep assault rifles from being sold at the gun shows. It would take some creative ideas, because they can't outright just ban people from selling things at the fairgrounds, but we would like to support them looking into ways that we could work towards this. So the county council meeting is July 12th at 10 a.m. We got Gun Sense Voter, I ordered Gun Sense Voter buttons, since you're not allowed to bring signs or anything, for everybody to wear that would want to come. So if you're interested in joining Faith in Action for this, you could talk to me or Pete about it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Also, this month, through the end of the month, FIA are welcoming all donations of hand sanitizer, dry eraser markers, pencils, crayons, glue sticks, and scissors. We have 18 teachers, 4 special teachers, and 2 title teachers on staff at Meister School in New Chicago. Usually we have a school drive for the kids, and this year Christian Schumacher came up with the idea to help the teachers have supplies, which in the end will help the children and the parents from having. So please make donations and bring them in no later than July 31st. Now please silence your devices, take a deep breath and another, and join us in spirits of reverence.
Thank you all for coming. If you would, join me in lighting our chalice. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of a life we share together.
The opening words are from one of my favorite writers, James Baldwin. I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. The opening hymn is number 119. Maggie will help us with this because I don't think we've sung it before.
Please rise as you are able. Oh, yes, you will.
Thank you, Maggie. Please remain standing and join me now in our affirmation of faith. The words are printed in the order of service and on the laminated handouts. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament. Service is its prayer. And this is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is the time during our service when we greet our neighbor. We're striving to create a worship space which is both spiritual and safe. We recognize that not everyone can attend in person, so there will be some of us who will be joining us online. We extend a warm welcome to those. So please greet your neighbor with a bow, with a handshake. This congregation expresses our greatest joys and deepest sorrows in community. We believe that a joy shared is magnified and a sorrow shared is diminished. We pause listening to what arises from within our hearts. Your joys and sorrows will not be streamed online, nor will they be part of the recording which is made public. Are there any joys or sorrows to be shared today? Yes. lift up these joys and sorrows and hold them in our hearts, including those too tender to share aloud. Now it's time for one of my favorite parts of any service, the story for the child in each of us. And the title of the book is We the Kids, the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And if you want to get a closer look afterwards, the drawings are spectacular. The original version of this sermon, which I started writing well over a month ago, started pretty mundanely. I was in search of a definition for a word or a family of words: patriotism, patriotic, patriot. And when I write about something, it clarifies things for me. So that's what I did. Striking, so I thought, at the heart of how to define a word, a family of words, that has taken such a beating over the past 200 plus years. And then, I watched the hearings and read and reread books and papers of historians and the media reports and the reports of political scientists. It threw everything into a sort of turmoil. The word patriot was being bandied about to describe people who had stormed the Capitol, planned the overthrow of the government, threatened the lives of legislators and the vice president, or to describe people whose disconnection from reality signaled a massive national unraveling that bordered on psychosis. So I mentioned to a church friend that I was going to need to make some adjustments to this sermon because of the events of the past several weeks. She sympathized, as she had faced the same issue because of events that had transpired in the week or so before her sermon. And then I had a dream. More on that in a moment. I have always relied on the teachings of an excellent speech professor I had as an undergraduate. She told me that a good speech always tells the listeners what they are going to hear, then tells them that what, and then closes by reminding them of what they just heard. And I saw some wisdom in that. But her advice about using an anecdote, a personal story, to launch a speech was something I always thought a shade manipulative, sort of a plea to like me, and perhaps listen more sympathetically rather than critically or earnestly. But then I had this dream. I was delivering a sermon or a speech in this dream about patriotism. Imagine that. To a crowd of people I didn't know, in a place that vaguely resembled our sanctuary. Well, at first anyway. It was pretty clear that these people were Christian nationalists. I think it was the crosses wrapped with bunting that told that. Perhaps even white supremacists, because there were more than a few swastikas. And I was being scrutinized by them and sneered at and jeered at. There was some minister there off to the side, no idea who he was supposed to be, and he was berating me for thinking I knew anything at all about patriotism. At some point, I saw someone I recognized, Jerry Ashmore. dressed in his robes and doing his best to calm people down and lead them in meditation. But they screamed with horribly contorted faces, and suddenly it wasn't our sanctuary, but a garage, maybe my own, opening into a huge, dark bog. I woke up just as the crowd was converging on Jerry, who was bowing furiously as he backed away. I fell asleep perhaps 30 minutes later, after recording the dream and realizing I had to rewrite my entire sermon. This happened at 1 o'clock on Saturday morning. I had originally sought to begin with an etymological analysis of the word patriot, and I bestow that on you now as a sort of retreat from my original sermon. Patriot, from the French patriota, from the Latin patriota, fellow countryman, from the Greek patriotis, of one's father, or patris, fatherland. The Oxford English Dictionary defines patriot as first, curiously, a fellow countryman or compatriot, while noting that that definition is rare. The second definition is more likely the one that most of us think of: a person devoted to his or her country, a person, in parentheses, claiming to be, ready to support or defend his or her country's freedoms and rights. I would suggest that is a fairly broad definition, and the parenthetical phrase, claiming to be, in the second part of that second definition, would certainly broaden the definition to include Samuel Johnson's scoundrel, or the patrioteer, defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as a person who makes a public display of patriotism, especially insincerely. So, there you have it. Seems as if anyone can call themselves a patriot. And based on my readings and viewings and listenings of not only the past several weeks, but of the past several decades, everyone and anyone usually does. The poet Wallace Stevens wrote a rather famous poem titled 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. After the hearings and the media reportage and the unsettling dream, I decided to take a cue from Stevens' poem to look at patriotism. There are probably many more than 13 ways of looking at patriotism, but you'll thank me for having limited it to 8. Patriotism as pride, number 1. America the exceptional, the shining city on the hill. Lincoln's dream of, quote, a place and time when America will once again be seen as the last best hope of earth. Or as George Bernard Shaw defined it, patriotism as, quote, your conviction that this country is superior to all others because you were born in it. But Malcolm X would warn us that, quote, you're not supposed to be so blind with patriotism that you can't face reality. Which brings me to number 2, patriotism as dissent. Howard Zinn and Barbara Ehrenreich are among the many familiar authors who preach that dissent is the essence and highest form of patriotism. Perhaps this is what Alexis de Tocqueville was thinking when he wrote in Democracy in America that, quote, the greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but rather in her ability to repair her faults. But maybe Bruce Springsteen says it best. There is real patriotism underneath the best of my music, but it is a critical, questioning, and often angry patriotism. Number 3, patriotism as tribalism. Patriot boys, daughters of the American Republic, American firsters, Christian nationalists, etc., etc., etc. The Marxist historian Eric Hobsbawm writes, quote, it seems that American patriotism measures itself against an outcast group. The right Americans are the right Americans because they're not like the wrong Americans, who are not really Americans. Or more simply, as Charles de Gaulle said, when love of your own people comes first, that is patriotism. The fourth way of looking, it's rather stodgy and old-fashioned and points in the direction of what will become the final eighth way of looking. Patriotism as duty, as obligation. Nothing flamboyant here, no flag waving or chest beating or outsized rhetoric. Adlai Stevenson said it best. Patriotism is not a short and frenzied outburst of emotion, but the tranquil and steady dedication of a lifetime. We need more of that. Our fifth way of looking is a polar opposite of the fourth. Patriotism as ego enhancement. Look at me. It says, I'm being patriotic. This is the category of looking under which Samuel Johnson's Scoundrel takes refuge. It is the category of charlatans and con artists. Ambrose Bierce called this category of patriotism combustible rubbish ready to the torch of anyone ambitious to illuminate his name. And Aldous Huxley suggested that patriotism of this type allowed one to bully and cheat with a feeling that we are profoundly virtuous. This fifth way of looking would seem to be representative of much that passes for patriotism in the very recent past. We have seen on the recent political stage Mark Twain's person who can holler the loudest without knowing what it is he is hollering about, and George Washington's warning about the impostures of pretended patriotism. But perhaps the most representative recent example would be Overstock.com founder Patrick Michael Byrne, who famously said, quote, "We want enough people adopting Bitcoin for a robust infrastructure. It's an act of patriotism." Closely related to number 5 is the sixth way of looking, patriotism as a means to an end. The philosopher David Hume saw the heights of patriotism as the beaten road to power and tyranny. The theater critic and writer George Nathan, speaking of colonialism, saw patriotism as often an arbitrary veneration of real estate above principles. And the wonderful 18th century French philosopher Denis Diderot described patriotism as an ephemeral motive that scarcely ever outlasts the particular threat to society that aroused it. The seventh way of looking sees patriotism not as a cause or a movement or a stance, but as an effect. Patriotism as an effect of strife. The philosopher and pacifist Bertrand Russell harshly condemned patriotism as the willingness to kill and be killed for trivial reasons. And Steve Allen felt that totalitarianism was patriotism institutionalized. And the philosopher Hannah Arendt would probably have agreed. Lao Tzu, in a softer and perhaps more empathic statement, wrote that when a notion is filled with strife, then do patriots flourish. And in times of war and conquest and division, as we well know, an 18th century British statesman Robert Walpole wrote, "Patriots spring up like mushrooms." And this brings me, thankfully, to the last of my 8 ways of looking. And I hope, reserve the best for last. Patriotism as a struggle for the common good. The general welfare, written into that preamble to the Constitution. In a speech, George McGovern said that the highest patriotism is not a blind acceptance of official policy, but a love of one's country deep enough to call her to a higher plane. He was, of course, referring specifically to the war in Vietnam. Thomas Steinbeck wrote of his father, John Steinbeck's view of patriotism, that without a thought for self, a true patriot stands up against the stones of condemnation and speaks for those who are given no real voice in the halls of justice or the halls of government. And Chicago's indomitable Nobel Prize-winning Jane Addams saw patriotism as progressive, a word not often used at the turn of the last century. That unless it was progressive and forward-looking, it could not embody the real affection and the real interest of the nation. And her contemporary, Clarence Darrow, would agree. True patriotism, he wrote, hates injustice in its own lands more than anywhere else. Contemporaries, economist Robert Reich and Roe Cannon, a U.S. representative from California, echo the thoughts of Jane Addams and others who saw and see patriotism as a force for improving and advancing the common good, echoing back also to that fourth way of looking, patriotism as duty and obligation, but with a forward thrust into a future that, at this moment, looks more than a bit dark. Representative Roe Cannon insists that patriotism must not be wrapped up in nostalgia, but must be future-oriented. And Robert Reich insists that true patriotism is about taking on a fair share of the burden of keeping America going. I lost my last, okay. We don't ever want to be quite as satisfied as Bill Vaughan, who said that, quote, a real patriot is the fellow who gets a parking ticket and rejoices that the system works. Rather, we need to be engaged and involved with moving this country forward, up and out of darkness in which it seemed and still often seems to be heading. There is no easy way. I highly recommend, the 20 lessons in historian Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny as a good starting point. Number 19 of his lessons is be a patriot. Set a good example of what America means for the generations to come. They will need it. And the last lesson, number 20, and this is a hard one, is be as courageous as you can. Amen. Now is the time in our service for our offering. We give to remind ourselves of how many gifts we have to offer. We give to remember that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We give because we believe in music and sacred space. There's an online link on the screen for both one-time and regular donations. The money in the baskets goes to sustaining the mission of our community. The money in the cups goes to this month's charity. And what is it this month? Every town. Okay, every town. For your prayers, your presence, your service, and your gifts, we are truly grateful. Please join in singing the closing hymn, number 121, Rise as You Are Willing and Able. This one we know. We'll build a seated. The closing words are from Cory Booker, Senator of New Jersey. Patriotism is love of country, but you can't love your country without loving your countrymen and countrywomen. We don't always have to agree, but we must empower each other. We must find the common ground. We must build bridges across our differences to pursue the common good.
Many's the time I've been mistaken, and many times confused. I've often felt forsaken, and certainly misused. Oh, but I'm alright. I'm as weary to my bones. So you don't expect to be bright and fond of home, so far away from home, so far away from home. And I don't know a soul who's not been battered, don't have a friend that feels at ease. I don't know a dream that's not been shattered or driven to its knees. Oh, but it's alright, we've lived so well so long. Still when I think about the road we're traveling on, I can't help but wonder what's gone wrong. I can't help it, wonder what's gone wrong. And I dreamed I was dying. I dreamed that my soul rose unexpectedly, and looking back down on me, smiled reassuringly. And I dreamed I was flying higher above my eyes, could clearly see the Statue of Liberty sailing away to sea. And I dreamed I was flying. Well, we come on the ship they call the Mayflower. We come on ships that sailed the moon. We come in the age's most uncertain hours and sing an American tune. Oh, but it's alright, you can't be forever blessed. Still tomorrow's gonna be another working day, and I'm just trying to get some rest. That's all I'm trying, to get some rest.
Beautiful. Now if you all would help me extinguish the flame. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Quick reminder, picnic outside.